Great. Well, good afternoon and welcome to our Round the Table. I'm Steve Beegoo. I'm the Head of Education here at Christian Concern. And hopefully you're going to be joined by some special guests who will be with us in a moment for considering this particular issue of the powers of the state. And so we have Randall Hardy with us. Welcome, Randall. Good to see you.
Hiya, Steve.
And we have Ruth Barber as well with us. Now, Randall Hardy, where are you calling in from today, Randall?
I'm in North Shropshire, that on the borders of Wales, but still in England.
Fantastic. And Ruth, where are you connecting in with us today from?
I'm in Bradford in West Yorkshire.
Wonderful. Now, Randall, you represent Do Not Nationalise Our Children. You have a website that has all of that. And Randall has been involved for many years in the home education realm. And Ruth Barber, you'll see it says on there, chess. So are you interested in chess? Is that what did you play chess, Ruth? Is that what you're up to? What does that stand for?
Yeah, I do not play chess. I have a son that does, but I am definitely not a chess player. But chess stands for Christian Home Education Support Service. So what we do is to support Christian families who home educate their children.
That's fantastic. And it's great to have us together as we think the powers of the state and who controls education. This is a really key issue at the moment, particularly with the schools bill, which is going through Parliament at the moment. And the question really is of who should have the ultimate say over what our children learn. Should that be parents? Should that be the government? And the schools bill that's going through at the moment, there's a white paper that Nadeem Zahawi put through, which, again, there's been quite a few policies that have been rushed out fairly recently that you may have noticed. And certainly the House of Lords have been wrestling with this in the committee stage just recently. They've done the 6th day of the committee stage there. And if you're tuning into this and you're interested, we've got articles like that on our Christian Concern website. Please do look at those. And also there'll be some other links which will appear here today that will help you think through what's going on with that schools bill in particular to relate to this questions of the powers of the state and what they might be wanting to introduce. So, Randall, if I could come to you first, Randall, I mean, you've seen a lot of the changes over the past few decades, the changes in attempts to change the law regarding parental freedoms, really, to educate. What, in your view, is the government up to here? What's the government trying to do at the moment, Randall?
Okay, Steve, thanks. Can I just correct you? My website's No Nationalisation of Kids, and that actually got set up in 2009 when Ed Balls and Graham Badman first brought about proposals like the ones we now see in the current schools bill to create registers of all the home educated children and to bring in monitoring and inspection, assessment of what they're being taught, and so on. That is when the seeds for today's bill was laid. It lay dormant after the 2010-11 till Lord Soley began to stir it up in 2017. And now he's very pleased because it's coming to fruition. But what are they trying? What are they about? I think, to put it bluntly, and this isn't just a home education matter, it should concern everyone, is they're trying to undermine the primacy of parents in their lives and in particular in the education of children. And that, Steve, is the key factor. Now, where does that come from? Is it just something that we find embedded in human rights legislation? Well, it is there. It's in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26, says that parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. It's also in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. It says states parties shall respect the rights and duties of the parents and provide to provide direction to the child in exercise of his or her right in a matter consistent with the evolving capacities of the child. So there's lots there, but it doesn't just come from there. It's historic, but why is it historic? It's natural, but why is it natural? And as we're talking to Christian Concern today, it's right there going back to creation. Paul in Ephesians 3, verse 14 and 15, is talking about bowing his knee before the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named.
Yes.
The name family comes from the fatherhood of our God. And in Greek, the word family means a fatherhood. And we have lived in our lifetimes, all of us, through an increasing secular revolution. And it's a revolution that's trying to get rid of everything that's made in the image of God. And within that is the characteristic of the family. And I'm sure I don't need to go through for your listeners today how many ways the family has been undermined. So we'll stick with education. And they may be familiar that already in schools, most parents who want a more either Christian or Muslim or a different value system teaching to their children are being overridden. And I see this bill as a step, because home educators are the main group of parents who live outside the school system. And there's been a long attack, and it's been led in many ways by people who've been involved with Humanist UK, like Lord Soley. And you don't need me to tell you that. You can go onto Humanist UK website and you can see it. So there is an attack here to stop parents teaching children according to their worldview and values. And that is really what's going on. And sadly, we're now in a state where even the Conservative government won't stand against that. They've been taken up with that agenda and they're going in that direction. Does that make sense?
Randall, so Randall, I mean, it's interesting in the House of Lords at the moment. So someone like Lord Baker, a former education minister, Secretary of State for Education, when looking at the proposals at the moment, which affect home educators but affect all sorts of aspects of education, he said that the white paper that's been introduced with the proposals is the greatest potential increase in the powers of the state since 1870. Would you concur with that? Is that what you're feeling and seeing as you're looking at the detail of that and the effect it could have, not just on home educating parents, but on all parents and families?
I'll bow to Lord Baker's history knowledge of what's been going on in Parliament, but it is a massive power grab. The first two parts of the bill are about the DFE, the Department for Education, taking control of every state-funded school in the country, taking it away from local authorities and taking it into their hands. Parts 3 and 4 are about home education and independent provision of education that doesn't have to be registered with Ofsted because it doesn't operate full time. And they're wanting to pull that back in. So I think every parent ought to be concerned about the provisions of this bill. Every grandparent, anybody who could be a parent in the future, and so on. It really, and the worst thing about it, Steve, is it doesn't spell out what they're going to do. There's massive areas where it says, we will decide this later through secondary legislation. Well, secondary legislation has got less checks and safeguards on it than primary legislation. And that's one of the things that has particularly annoyed Lord Baker and various other peers in the debates over the last few weeks.
And so it does seem fairly open. It's very open-ended at various points, is one of the things that you're saying. And it is putting powers into the hands of directly actually into the Secretary of State for Education. And that's where a lot of people are pushing back and saying, hang on a minute, who knows what future secretary, you may be lovely, Nadeem Zahari, but who knows what powers you may be giving to others in the future. And if I come to Ruth a bit now, I mean, one of the things that has been made a bit more specific in the legislation are things to do with a register Now, there's nothing very harmful about a register, particularly. Is there, Ruth? Would you want to comment on some of the ideas around having a register for those who home educate, and what's being suggested there, and are there any issues around that? And then I'll bring Randall in as well on this topic.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the issue of a register is quite a big one, and I think the phrase that springs to mind is it's never just about a register. Registration is the first step. I think Kate Dixon, in her role as Director of Schools and Education, she actually is quoted as saying that a mandatory register is actually the first of 3 steps that they want to look at in terms of future legislation. So obviously just the idea that it's just to see who's home educating and we just need to know who's doing that is a bit of a misnomer, because it's never just about collecting data for its own sake. There is always a reason why. And I think the concern for many home educators is it's what's going to come next. Because if a register is mandatory in that you have to be on it, then there must be a reason why they're insisting that you're on it. And, you know, Kate Dixon has said that the next stage is to look at monitoring of home educators. And the next step after that would be actually looking at the content. So the implication there is that it's a narrowing road for us in terms of our freedom to choose what we do and what we teach in our homes. And that's why it's a particular concern. A list of itself wouldn't concern me, except that I don't feel that we can trust the local authorities and the government in terms of why they're introducing it. And I think there's many home educators who are feeling similarly about that.
But Randall, it's only a small amount of data that they would want to be collecting, isn't it, Randall? So, again, would you say this is not really a very big issue, or is this a very serious issue?
I would say that if anybody's read this bill, and the Lords have, they're all saying there's absolutely no restraint on the data they can collect through this bill. Absolutely none. They want to know reasons for home educating. They want to know the faith, if there's any religious faith in the house. They want to know. In fact, it actually says that the Secretary of State can ask for any information they want, and over and above that, local authorities, when people are signing up for this register, can ask for any other information they want. So what type of cornflakes do you buy? Where do you go on holiday? Anything like that. This is ridiculous. They made a similar request. They had a similar intention in the Isle of Man on a bill now that's been abandoned. And the home educators in the Isle of Man got a legal opinion from an Isle of Man human rights lawyer. And he said, this is against all human rights. And this is the worrying thing. It goes back. There is a growing lack of respect for people's privacy in nations, in our nations as well. And we may have thought that Britain was on the front line of defending that privacy, but more and more it's being eroded. And this again is why this is not just a home education thing. And they already collect data on children in school without parents' consent. There was some schools taking children's fingerprints a while back without getting parents' permission. And they keep it for 25 years. And they're talking about keeping not all the data, but some of it for over 60 years.
Yeah, Randall, there's a question that's come in about Wales. I don't know if we can pull that question up here. William Steele has asked how this new bill will affect Wales. Things that often are reflected differently in the devolved countries of the United Kingdom. Is there anything particular you want to comment on regarding Wales, Randall?
Yep, this bill does not affect Wales, but don't turn off William. Listen carefully, because the Welsh government is putting through, they were hoping to have it into Parliament now, secondary legislation to implement 2 things they consulted on. In 2019, they consulted on new guidance for home education, which would give the state a lot more power to inspect what home educated children were being taught and things. And in 2020, they consulted on a national database of all children in Wales, and that would be collected with, it would be mandated that health authorities, health workers would have to contribute information to that database, to those databases. And that's certainly upset a lot of medics, because they know that that type of data collection will actually stop people engaging with health services.
Yes.
All this was stopped by the pandemic and put on ice, but recently the new education minister there, Jeremy Miles, has been talking about implementing the proposals that were consulted on. He wanted to put forward secondary legislation before the summer recess. Recently, in a response to a Children and Young People's Education Committee request via letter, he stated that it wasn't going to be possible to do it before the summer recess, but he was hoping to put it forward in September so it can be implemented in April next year. So these proposals in Wales are likely to come in well before the ones in England. And just so that so that people know where to look for more information, there's a group called Families First in Education Wales. And if people search for Families First in Education Wales, they'll get there. They've got a page on what the government's doing, which gives you people all the links. So it's a good place to go.
Thanks ever so much for that specific information as well, Randall. And maybe that link could be to Families First, could be put into the link for us all. We also had the issue in Scotland of the named persons scheme, which again was going to override the primacy of the parents' role in all of this. Now, Ruth, if I could just come back to you. I mean, chess has been going for 30 years this year, I understand. So it's kind of 30 years anniversary. So you've been working with many home education parents. I know you've had meetings recently with home education parents. What kind of questions or issues are they raising with you, Ruth, that are coming to the fore?
I think the overriding kind of response to this bill is that people are actually quite shocked at the extent of the proposals that are actually been written down. I think they're shocked by the tone as well. The overriding assumption seems to be that school is the best and only place for children. And therefore, when one reads this bill, it seems to presume that there is an issue with home educating families, which, of course, the Department of Education's own guidelines state that of itself, home education is not a safeguarding risk. And yet just the whole tone of the legislation would seem to indicate that actually they believe that there is a risk, and that, you know, if your child is not at school, then there is a problem with that. So it does feel like parents are being very much victimised just for exercising their parental rights.
And are there some quite significant punishments potentially for parents in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly are. I mean, we're looking at quite big fines, £1,000, but possibly rising depending on other legislation that's going through to £2,500, and also even prison, again for 3 months, but that could rise to 51 weeks. And that's just that it all hinges, Steve, on whether the education that you provide is deemed to be suitable, and that is quite a crux issue really for home educators, because normally we would be known to the local authority anyway. I think 96% of home educators are actually known to the local authority, so the vast majority are actually in contact with them. That is normally takes the form of like an annual report on what you're doing for each child. And the usual response is that unless there's any kind of reason to think that that is not, that there's any kind of risks with that, or that there's something that's not being done right, then you kind of ticked off, if you like, for a year, and that's it until the next year. But the thing about this is that it's very subjective, because it depends on your local authority. There's a bit of a postcode kind of lottery out there, because different areas have very different standards and very different people that are assessing your suitability of your education. And the vast majority of staff, local authority staff, are actually untrained as to the different ways that children learn. I think the fact that many children are being taken out of school just says, number one, that the school system itself has issues, but number two, that school children, they don't all fit in a classroom type pedagogy. They have very, very different ways of learning. They learn things at different rates and at different times. And very often that's the very reason that parents are saying, you know, I think actually we can meet the child's needs best by taking them out of that system which isn't working for them. So the idea that you've got kind of staff who are assessing that, who are untrained, largely untrained, very often that either perhaps have been teachers in the past, so they're looking at very much looking for a classroom style learning experience, or even social workers. Many of them have been social workers, so their lens obviously is looking at everything through a safeguarding lens. And there is no training for these people. So, you know, at the stroke of a pen almost, they can actually totally criminalise parents just because perhaps they don't understand how that child learns, or even that there are different ways of learning and different ways that can happen. So it is really concerning.
Particularly pick up on, I mean, you're the Christian Home Education Support Service. Yes. So are there, I mean, would Christians be particularly concerned about this because of the Christian teaching that they'd be wanting to bring? Are there concerns around that being monitored and maybe that not
most definitely
suitable education for some reason?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think what Randall was saying about the collection of data, if they're starting to ask what resources you use, I mean, many of the Christian home educators choose Christian resources because they want their child to have a Christian worldview. So suddenly, you know, is somebody going to say, well, actually, I don't agree with that, so then we want you back in school? You know, there's a school attendance order slapped on you because somebody doesn't agree with that. You know, maybe they're an atheist, or maybe they're a humanist, and actually they see, you know, they don't feel that that's appropriate. But there is very much, you know, just the unlimited data that could be collected gives us a great pause for concern, because there is no kind of, you're totally at the mercy of the one person who is actually assessing you about that. And that can be very subjective.
I can see that. Randall, do you want to come in on that as well?
I will do, yes, please, Steve, because a lot of this, as I mentioned earlier, has come about from a self-confessed, a self-recognised campaign by the British Humanist Organisation, now called Humanist UK. And you just look on their website and there's a lot there, but it is particularly aimed, they do say Muslim unregistered schools, but they've also had in their site Orthodox Jewish yeshivas, which have long existed in this country. They are not schools in the fact they do not meet the criteria that has existed up to now. And this is clearly a religious campaign by those who would claim not to be religious, because they are seeking to prevent parents teaching their children according to their culture and their beliefs. And if that's happening with one group, as boldly as it is, you can be sure it will happen to every other group. And that's not just Christians. It's not just Christians and Muslims. There's Sikhs as well. And I don't know what numbers are there amongst home educators. But a lot of home educators choose not to send their children to school because of their philosophical convictions. And what is important here, it goes back to that principle I mentioned at the beginning, that parents have the primacy to choose the type of education their children should have. And if that isn't protected for everybody, only those who are happy for the state to become the indoctrinators of their children will be happy in the future. And just to throw one phrase in there very quickly, hearsay, yes, but a friend of ours has got a Christian friend who's a teacher, who has been a teacher for years. They were told in a recent Ofsted inspection that they're not in education, they're in social engineering. And when she heard that from an Ofsted inspector, she's working her way out of the profession now because she doesn't want to be involved in social engineering. Yes.
Well, that would be a very, very concerning statement. And this kind of ideological backdrop to all of this, a question's come in related to Stonewall. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is a huge rise in Christians home educating because they don't like what is being pushed in their schools, particularly in this month of June. I think a lot of Christians are waking up to some of the indoctrination which is going on inside of those schools. Are you aware of any of Stonewall's involvement in any of these particular legislation that drive towards this kind of legislation?
None that has been documented anywhere. They haven't commented on it. They've not said anything. I think it still isn't into their territory. If they're going to be interested in the future, it's not there yet. So none of that at all that I'm aware of.
We have something in that's come on from an Orthodox Albanian who asked whether the government have given any examples of what home education is suitable. Have they given any examples, Ruth? Because that statement sounds very broad and is, of course, concerning. Ruth, is there any criteria around what is suitable that anyone is using?
I think that's the difficulty, Steve. It is intentionally left broad because even in kind of in government legislation, there is no definition for suitable because it has to take into account each individual child, their age, their ability and their aptitude and any special educational needs they have. So you can't just write a definition that just sits easily in there by which to kind of define that of itself. So that's why it's concerning, because it leaves it completely open-ended, and therefore it is open to interpretation by the people who are actually on the ground and looking at the educational provision of each family. It is really concerning. And I think the other thing that is of great concern to us is the fact that there is no kind of appeals process, or there is no kind of regulation of these people who have got massive, been given through this legislation, massive powers to disrupt and to, have a say over family life. But there is.
Can I just clarify? So what you're saying is a local authority person could come into someone's home, potentially untrained, deciding what suitable education is. And if they think, for example, you're not passing across British values around sexuality or gender, that they could say, you're not got a suitable education, I'm afraid. We're telling you to send them to the school up the road. However good that school is up the road, you've got to send them to that school. Is that really what you're saying could be a result of this legislation?
Absolutely, yeah. Without any kind of amendments going through to change that. That is exactly why it's of such concern to us. And the thing is that, as I say, unless there is some regulation in terms of the local authorities, they've got kind of free rein to do that, and there is no recourse for parents. So if that happened to you and you feel that you've been unjustly kind of treated, or you feel that you've not been listened to, or they're not taking into account some evidence that you've given, as it stands with that legislation, there is no appeals process. There is no way that parents can actually stand against that. So it can be very, very kind of judgmental, even on the part of any particular given local authority officer. And that's why, again, without protections in place for all parties, it's very bad legislation, because those should be built in the primary legislation. And at the moment, it is just not there. And that is a huge concern, because it leaves you in a very, very vulnerable place.
So it feels like the state control, again, is being increased to a level which is really downgrading private freedoms for not just home educators, but potentially for many children. There are many situations whereby a parent might decide that the local school is not a suitable, safe, healthy environment for their child. And we always, in this country, we've had the backup of being able to say, well, we can home educate our children while we try and find out what is going to be suitable. But all parents would lose that ability potentially without there being quite aggressive intervention from the state, or even the state saying, no, you have to send your children.
That's right.
Any comments on that at all, Randall? Because, I mean, one of the things I often hear is, well, children have a right to education. It's the child's right to have an education, and that should trump the rights of parents to do whatever they want to do in a home with a child. Any response to that?
Plenty, but not enough time to give it. But let me give you some. Who decides what is an education? You see, the default position is that if a child is registered at a school, it is receiving an education, even if that school is failing, or more and more, even if that school is unable to provide a suitable provision for that child. The state says if they're attending a school, they are receiving a suitable education. Otherwise, parents would have to be prosecuted for sending them to school that is failing.
Even if it's an Ofsted rated low quality school by Ofsted, Randall.
If it was judged as low or failing, then if it's low, parents would be under a legal responsibility to move them somewhere else because they're not ensuring one is provided. So the state says, you send them to our school, you discharge your duty, you're no longer responsible. That's how it works. But with this bill, what they're doing, and this is for all parents, not just home educating ones, if a child is issued with a school attendance order, currently, once the child starts attending that school, it is then spent. And in the future, they can request that they are withdrawn. They can take them back into home education. But usually a school attendance order specifies the school as well. That expiry is going to be withdrawn if this bill goes through in its present form. And the school attendance order will last forever. Now, one of the driving factors for the rise in home education numbers is the high level of special education, children with special education needs that are not being provided with a suitable education by the state. And out of desperation, many parents are opting to home educate. And some are finding it great, some are finding it terrible. But if one of those children gets a school attendance order, it will never be withdrawn, which sounds to me rather sledgehammers and nuts, as one of the members of the House of Lords got his knuckles for talking about in Wednesday's debate. But that is it. This is it. So
yes, yeah.
This is the people are talking about Henry VIII powers, which is actually a state power grab. I'm going to have all this power, but I'm not going to tell you what it is till it happens type approach to things. And so many politicians are talking about this bill as a Henry VIII power. So badly worked out.
Yes. Ruth, if I could come to you about what can be done about this by parents, not just home educating parents in general, Christians who are part of congregations thinking, should we be talking about this? Should we be saying anything about this? What is it you're saying to the people that are contacting you about what can be done?
Okay, well, there's various things. I mean, I think things like this, Steve, just raising awareness and talking about the issues and the legislation that's going through is probably the biggest thing that most people can do. I've been out and about kind of talking to people in parks, talking to families, and without exception, not one person is aware of the schools bill, even though they might have children in schools. Not one person, if you say, do you know about the schools bill? I haven't had one who has actually known about it. So the first thing is just talking to people, saying, have you heard about it? Because it really will, it's further down the line. Once the legislation is passed, we have passed the point at which anything can be done about it. It will be kind of, in the law, and it's important that people know and that we can talk about these issues now. So talk to family, talk to friends, talk to your neighbours, talk to people in your church, and also inform yourself. Do a little bit of research. Just don't take our word for it, but look at what's happening. There's lots of information. If you just type schools bill, you will get a plethora of different different places to learn and to read what is actually being proposed. If you are wanting to kind of be more proactive, there is a written petition that home educators particularly are signing, are promoting, because we want to actually send a statement when this bill actually gets to the House of Commons stage. This will be presented. We have an MP who is going to champion and present the petition. That will go behind the Speaker's chair in the bag, as they say. And that is just a real big statement saying that there are a lot of people in this country, in almost every constituency, who actually have a problem with the legislation that's going through. So that is something that anybody can do. In most constituencies, there will be somebody that's collecting signatures. So again, a bit of a search on social media, for the elective home education written petition, mass petition. People can sign that. And also to pray, as people of faith, I think the biggest thing we can do is to pray, and just pray for wisdom, pray for opportunities to just kind of raise the issues. I think a lot of people feel that it's a big thing and I couldn't possibly understand it. That's certainly where I was a few years ago. But just, keeping an eye on these issues over the last few years, it's just so important that we know what's going on, because at the end of the day, for me, it's about my children, my grandchildren. I've almost finished home educating. Yes. Our youngest is 13. So whilst it could be tricky for me, I want my children to have the rights and the ability to actually choose home education and to have that freedom to choose for their children. And that is why I'm kind of, fighting this, doing what I can to do it now.
Very good. A comment's come in, which is a really, really interesting from Jimmy Hickson, who just puts the phrase "education before indoctrination," or children have a right to an education, not indoctrination. I don't know if he's commenting on indoctrination from parents or from the state, or quite what that means. But Randall, you've regularly been wrestling with these issues of what is indoctrination, what is education, and particularly in terms of parent freedoms to pass on their faith to their children. Do we have any comments on Jimmy Hickson's comment there that children have a right to an education, not indoctrination?
I would say that's exactly what I'm bothered about. I want children to be educated, not indoctrinated. Now, if he's saying that we shouldn't be home educating, he's assuming that the state system doesn't indoctrinate children. But actually, you look at the history of schools, they've always been about indoctrination. You can go back. I'll just go back to the early church schools. The Catholic Church used those to indoctrinate the next generation. When Martin Luther came along, I've heard it said, and I haven't been able to find the source, but he was concerned because he was against the Catholic Church that the Prussian authorities needed to do something to stop the Catholic Church indoctrinating children. So he said to them, unless you run your own schools, you will never free people from the Catholic Church. The state has never been too keen on that, wasn't too keen on that originally, till they discovered that it was a way of indoctrinating the next generation. And that's carried on. What did we British do through schools, through history? The system we've got was developed in India, and I forgot the guy's name, but it was a way of indoctrinating Indians out of their culture into British culture. We did it even worse in Australia. We took children off their families, moved them thousands of miles away. So we then began to indoctrinate them in our Western values, not those of their parents. Let's take it one step further. In the news for last year, there's been terrible things coming out of Canada with Indigenous Canadians and their children being taken off them. And what schooling is about today, it is not about education. Schooling is about indoctrination. And if you want to know what the current indoctrination agenda is, you look at the UNESCO's Sustainable Development Goals. Those are what children are being indoctrinated in today. Those are behind British values. And yes, there is a mention of British values in this bill and the expectation. And there is as well, parallel to this bill, is some rather atrocious guidance published in 2019 on home education. And that too mentions British values. And so British values is not well defined. It changes with what the measure is. This is the agenda that's being pushed in schools. It is not traditional British values. It's David Cameron's and friends' new British values. So I'm all for education before indoctrination, which is why I would encourage parents to think seriously about sending their children into schools.
That's really, really helpful. Some links are going to appear in the the chat for those that are watching, those that are viewing, of other places that you can kind of investigate and find out some of the details about the schools bill, about home education, about some of the things that are being proposed. That thankfully we've Jimmy has actually clarified. I mean, he said he really wants a healthy biblical education for our children, not state indoctrination, and I think that's a very clear way of stating it. The word indoctrination contains in it the word doctrine, doesn't it? And someone's always trying to pass on doctrine of some kind or another. And I think it's, as you say, you should be very careful if you give your children to somebody who's teaching them something. There's a spirit behind it. There's some truth behind it. It's not necessarily just neutral knowledge that's being passed from one brain to another. That's not how education works. That's not what's going on when you're a parent educating your children. You're passing on values, attitudes. So many different things are being passed on by those who you ask to educate your children, and that indoctrination process is happening relationally the whole time, as well as with the kind of knowledge which is being passed on. As we're going to come to an end, there are other aspects of that schools bill which people should also be looking into and be concerned about. I know that there was a mention about academies and schools overriding the parental rights, that some of the freedoms that they seem to have, they're using them in a very totalitarian way themselves, some of these schools. So there's a few things to be looking at there. Please do look at the Christian Concern website. Please do sign up to the Christian Concern emails that come through regularly. Just a parting comment, maybe from both from Ruth and then Randall as we come to an end. Is there anything else that you would encourage us to say? You'd want us to be thinking about or saying as we come to the end of this time? Ruth?
No, I just think please pray, and it just really is bigger, I think, than any of us realise, the implications of where not just this bill, but any subsequent bills go. So I do think, please tell people, please talk about it, and please, do your utmost to kind of raise the issues amongst people, because people just don't know, and it's crucial that they do find out and that they are made aware.
Yes, it's the sixth day of debate in the House of Lords on Monday, I believe, and then it'll be going to a report stage for the autumn, and then it'll be coming to the House of Commons. So yes, please stay vigilant on that. Randall, any final thoughts?
From what I've heard, the government wants it to get through report stage before the summer recess and be out the House of the Lords, but the Lords are kicking up. 2 points to make. In the context of this school bill is a growing narrative among children's professionals, which is a horrible term, but that's what's used, that actually parents cannot be trusted. And this is really worrying. They come to parents as if they are a danger to their children. And that is the narrative which is amongst politicians as well. And I would encourage people to think, to pray around why is that happening more than anything. And the other thing's gone out of my head, so I'll leave it there. This narrative in children's services that parents cannot be trusted anymore is a dangerous one.
And maybe we can end with a word of prayer, Randall, on this call. Randall, would you pray that we know what to do and have the wisdom that we need, and that our children will be protected as we go forward? Because this is such an important issue, and we believe that prayer changes things. And even if you're joining us live now, if you're happy to just join us for a word of prayer, that we can say amen together about what you agree with on earth is done for you in the heavenly realm. So, Randall, would you mind just saying a word of prayer as we close?
I'll pray, Steve. Father, I want to thank you that when Jesus was on earth, he spoke strongly about those who cause little ones who believe in him to stumble. And Lord, he warned that it would be very bad for them if they did that. But Lord, I want to pray for those people. They would see that and they would humble themselves before you. But more, Father, I want to pray at this time that you would protect the younger generations, not just in England and Wales, but around the world. Lord, because parenthood is under threat around this globe. And Lord, I ask you to shake those who are your enemies in this matter, that their grip on the younger generations would be loosened, and that those who believe in you from the younger generations might grow in faith I might become bold for you.
Yes.
I might bring you pleasure in eternity. And Father, I ask it in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Yes. Amen. Yes. Amen. Thank you ever so much, Ruth. Thank you ever so much, Randall. Please do check out Chess's website, Christian Home Education Support Service. Check out the other links that have been provided for you as well. I'd also recommend the HE Byte, which is an excellent also place to stay up to date with what's going on in the home education world, but also with the schools bill. That's really excellently updated. And please stay in touch with Christian Concern. We have many issues related to education, cases that are coming up as well. Please stay in touch. And it's been delightful to be able to do this for you this afternoon. We hope to see you again next week. God bless.